The Dunmores at Dinner by Josh Watkins. Lights fade up. An ornate crystal chandelier throws a warm amber glow on an elegant dining room decorated with dark cherry wood panelled walls. On the majestic walls delicately hangs artwork that belongs in a museum. In the center of the room, a large 15-foot hand-carved oak table with a refined dining set and cutlery meticulously placed at each end of the table for dinner. Seated at the high-back dining chairs at either end of the lawn table are aristocrats Mr. and Mrs. Henry Dunmore. Mrs. Dunmore is savouring a particularly insignificant Bordeaux, while Mr. Dunmore is attempting to cut his steak.
Henry? Should we go to the theatre tonight?
If you would like to, my dear.
I would not like to.
Then we needn't go.
Henry? Should we go to the opera tonight?
I usually categorize the opera with the theatre.
Darling, you generalize so.
Oh, I'm sorry, dear. Do you want to go to the opera?
No, I don't think so. Perhaps we should go to the museum.
Perhaps. However, the nude sculptures unsettle me slightly.
Nudity in general seems to unsettle you.
Indeed. But if you'd like to go, we'll go.
No, I'd rather not.
Then we shan't.
Henry, I seem to have a peculiar urge.
Do you, dear?
Yes, I do, dear. And frankly, as long as it isn't satisfied, I feel that I might explode. Or implode. Or something.
That doesn't sound pleasant.
Perhaps I'm bored. Say something fascinating.
The steak is overdone.
That is the least fascinating thing I think I've ever heard in my entire life.
Don't you think it's a little late for hyperbole, dear?
I think the atmosphere is monotonous enough for hyperbole. You undervalue your imagination if you think that a comment on the cuisine is the most fascinating thing that you can think of.
Well, regardless, the steak is overdone, and since Cook has never overdone the steak before, I thought that was fascinating.
I suppose that is fascinating on a microscopic scale. Shall I ring for Helen?
If you wouldn't mind, dear.
You rang, Mum.
Yes, I did ring Helen.
Did Mum want something?
Oh, yes, I think I did. Oh, no, I think it was Mr. Dunmore that wanted something.
Oh, yes, of course. I need you to tell the cook she overdid the steak.
Are you sure that's necessary, sir?
Well, yes. She overdid the steak, and I don't want it overdone. I thought the input would be helpful.
If it must be done, it must be done.
As long as it isn't too done. That will be all, Helen. Thank you.
That seems to have done nothing at all for my boredom.
I'm very sorry, darling.
I feel as if something drastic needs to happen, and should have happened, yet hasn't happened.
That is a rather peculiar urge.
Perhaps if I did something rash, that might improve my disposition.
Good heavens, Louisa, I hope it won't come to that. Maybe we should go to the theatre after all. Some catharsis might do you some good.
Catharsis? Henry, I never thought of you as an Aristotelian.
As an aristocrat, I only thought it proper.
I see. Regardless, I'd rather not go to the theatre. I elect to do something rash.
Oh dear.
Perhaps a small homicide.
Homicide, dearest. Could you not try something a little less drastic?
Perhaps. I have an idea.
Are you sure we should involve the servants in this matter?
One has to give the servants something to gossip about. I can hardly think of anything interesting in their own lives.
Helen enters with a black eye.
Cook says she will look into the mistake and avoid it in the future, sir.
Thank you, Helen.
Helen, would you stand here for a moment?
Louisa splashes wine from her glass into Helen's face.
Thank you, Mum. Will that be all?
Ask cook for a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon. That should be satisfactory, thank you.
If Mum desires.
I indeed desire.
Well, if it must be done, it must be done.
A good girl, Helen. So easygoing. Did that rash act help?
Somewhat. I'm afraid the urge is still there, however.
Dear me.
Henry,
Yes, darling.
have you ever considered Bolshevism?
Pardon?
What if I became a Bolshevik?
A Bolshevik.
Yes, a Bolshevik.
In heaven's name, why would you do that?
Well, it seems somewhat exciting. Running around, waving red flags, overthrowing the bourgeois.
Well, darling, you'd have to overthrow the aristocracy as well, and where would that leave us?
Yes, I suppose I'd have to shoot you, wouldn't I? Or at least send you to a gulag.
Yes, and you'd also have to send yourself to a gulag as well.
Perhaps it's better that I don't care for Bolshevism.
Perhaps.
I'll have to think of something else exciting, with more legality.
Have you considered the symphony?
There is nothing legal to do that I haven't already done. Besides, they're playing Mendelssohn. I don't care for Mendelssohn.
I don't mind Mendelssohn.
You don't mind anything, dear. That's what makes you so agreeably dull.
Dull. Darling, do you find me dull?
Darling, you're intolerably dull.
You find it intolerable? Well, I do not share your sentiment. I, for one, tolerate my dullness quite adequately. And for good measure, I think it quite insensitive for you to make such sentiments known.
I'm sorry, dear, but I've been holding in these sentiments for the past 10 years and they simply popped out. Your dinner conversations are quite uninspiring. Perhaps it isn't your fault. We should have hired a better cook. The quality of the food is too distracting for you to think of anything interesting.
Louisa, I wish you might have made these sentiments known much earlier in our marriage. For the past 10 years, you've been leading me on and thinking that I was a brilliant conversationalist.
Well, I'm sorry for leading you on, but surely you might have noticed how bored everyone is when you speak to them. Remember at our last reception, poor Mrs. Laney died of a conniption fit after your comments on the appetizers?
I don't see the connection between appetizers and a conniption fit.
Everyone else did. We were simply too dignified to acknowledge it in public.
But you can't say that I'm the cause of all the boredom amongst our social circles. Is not boredom one of the great privileges of the aristocracy?
Yes, my dear, but only in moderation. You provide it in droves.
I don't quite care for the current subject. It feels very demeaning.
Very well, dear.
Perhaps a change of subject is in order.
Very well. I'm practically bored to death anyway.
Darling, you know my attitude towards hyperbole.
What did you have in mind as a change of subject?
I was considering commenting on the soup.
You know, dear, I think I should do something rash again. What if I throw the candelabra to the ground in a fit of spontaneous passion?
I wouldn't take very kindly to that. That is a prized possession.
I believe the indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest had a ceremony called a potlatch, where individuals would destroy prized possessions to display their wealth.
Well, we are not indigenous persons of the Pacific Northwest.
I think they would even kill slaves. That gives me an idea.
It's rather peculiar that you're ringing for a servant right after you talk of killing one.
Helen enters with another black eye.
Cook says we're out of the Cabernet Sauvignon. She recommends the claret.
I'm not in the mood for claret, but enough of that. I was thinking of something destructive and I rang for you, but I don't recall exactly what.
That may be for the best, dear.
Oh, now I remember. Helen, bring Mr. Dunmore the box.
The box, Mum?
Yes, I believe that is what I said. That will be all, Helen.
But Mum, not the box.
Yes, the box, Helen. That's what I said. That will be all, Helen.
But Mum, you said the box was only for the gravest of circumstances.
That will be all, Helen.
Well, if it must be done. But it must be done.
Yes, thank you, Helen.
Oh, and Helen, would you mind telling Cook that the soup was a bit tepid?
Aye, sir.
Helen seems strangely agitated by this box you speak of.
The contents of the box have certain unpleasant connotations for particular types of people.
I hope I'm not that type of person. I don't think I care for unpleasant connotations.
You're very predictable, dear.
Thank you, dear.
Helen enters with an elegant wooden box and a freshly broken nose. She sets it in front of Henry.
God save you, sir.
Why, thank you, Helen. What a pleasant thing to say. Such a good girl, Helen. Well, darling, what would you like me to do with this box?
Henry, this box contains the salvation to our marriage.
What would our marriage need saving from?
My all-consuming and wrathful boredom. The contents of the box will assist in its destruction.
Oh. Should I open it?
Yes, you should, dear.
Opens the box, takes out a revolver.
Oh, heavens.
Henry, I want you to shoot me in the heart.
I shall do no such thing.
It's the only thing that can enliven our marriage.
But, darling, it will kill you.
My homicide is the only legal escape I can make from this boredom. Except for divorce. And that is far too cliché.
But, darling, I haven't a motive.
Well, you could say you were driven to desperation by my constant biting criticism and my brazen hyperbole.
Well, that's not quite a legal motive, dearest.
Perhaps. Then I shall give you a legal motive. I'm going to advance on you with this knife.
Louisa, don't be vulgar. And put down that knife. I will not shoot you.
Don't be so dull, Henry.
I'm not being dull. I'm being a dutiful husband.
Those are usually the same thing.
I don't want to shoot you.
Don't be selfish, darling. You should put our marriage before your personal preferences.
I'd rather not shoot you.
Then shoot something, for God's sake.
Fine!
He shoots the chandelier to pieces.
Oh my! That was exciting, dear.
It was a family heirloom.
You have saved our marriage. And successfully displayed your wealth. And to think that all I needed was a rash act from you.
Placing the revolver back in the box and closing it.
It was rather too rash for my tastes. But I'm happy that you found some satisfaction for this urge of yours.
Well, almost. There's something else that needs to be done. Something slightly more rash than violence.
Oh dear. What might that be?
I don't recall. It's definitely something we've put off.
Perhaps you'll remember over dessert.
Dessert. Oh, it has come to me. Let us consummate our marriage.
Good heavens!
That explains all my pent-up frustration.
How vulgar, darling. You know how nudity unsettles me.
Yes, I know, dear, but after all, it has been 10 years since the wedding. Marriages are usually consummated within a few hours of the nuptials.
That sounds terribly bourgeois. But I suppose that we've put it off for too long. Now that I think about it, I admit I have been experiencing murderous inclinations.
Indeed. How charming. Henry, you are a model of emotional suppression.
Thank you, Louisa.
Oh, thank the Lord angels, you're still with us, sir.
Why, thank you, Helen. What a charming thing to say.
Yes, Helen, your quaint religious sensibilities are quite amusing. Would you tell Cook that we will not be having dessert tonight? Mr. Dunmore and I are going to retire early for sexual intercourse.
Begging your pardon, Mum.
We're skipping dessert for sexual intercourse. I think that's the more scientific term for the act.
I was hoping to wait until after dinner.
I was hoping I wouldn't have to wait. But I suppose there are more candelabras about the house to be smashed until then.
On second thought, it may be best if we retire early.
Oh, Henry, you are so charmingly susceptible to intimidation.
Helen stands for a moment confused. She then stares at the remains of the chandelier. Then opens the box and stares at the revolver. She sighs. Hey, puts it back in the box. Closes it. Sighs. And exits. The dark void encompasses the stage.